YuYu Hakusho is arguably one of the greatest shonen of all time. Yusuke, a man once dead, now brought back as a spirit detective to take on the worst cases involving the demon world and all the terror that comes along with it. I only just recently watched the entire series like a year or two ago and decided to collect the entire manga collection just because I love this series that much. So when a live-action adaptation was announced, I figured it was going to fall into the same fate as every other unfortunate live-action adaptation that exists. This could easily be another Dragon Ball Evolution. However, I kind of had hope that this would be the next One Piece live-action after that initial trailer. Let's talk about it. My name is Josue, welcome to the Panic Brothers channel, and I have a lot of thoughts about this show. So let's not waste any more time as we go ahead and talk about the new YuYu Hakusho live-action. Did I like this show? Well... Yes, I loved it very much. But let's talk about it a little bit. Now, it's really easy to compare this series to One Piece to live action. Both are Netflix productions and adaptations of two of the greatest 90s shonen of all time. Of course, the approach was wildly different for both. One Piece took a bit more of a global approach as the entire cast is completely diverse. The series was filmed in South Africa, the production was American, and the marketing was international as even the Luffy and Sanji actors were out here speaking Spanish in the press tour. Now, YuYu Hakusho didn't do that, and it's not a bad thing. This series primarily took place in Japan. Why wouldn't it also be filmed in Japan with Japanese actors only? Makes sense. That's just what the series was. The nature of One Piece just so happened to lend itself to that global approach. YuYu Hakusho didn't. And yet there's another drawback to YuYu Hakusho. The series hasn't really made any sort of splash or waves since it ended back in 1994. It kind of just existed. There was never really anything big. I mean, there was that OVA that came out not too long ago. There was also, a couple of video games that came out for the PS2. If we're really gonna reach here, it was in Yusuke made an appearance in Jump Force. If you really wanna make a reach right now, but no, YuYu Hakusho has not really been relevant for a while now. Unfortunately, this series is goated, but what can we do? YuYu Hakusho was just dead until literally this live action was announced. When the posters first teasing our main cast came out, I literally joined the rest of the internet in hating it completely. To this day, I still don't really think this is the right way to approach marketing this series. And I think it's also one of the reasons why One Piece took its time in announcing its cast, or rather, at least showing them off in the costumes of the show. The negative reception was through the roof for these posters. I absolutely hated Kuwabara and Kurama more than anything. It just looked so off from the source material to me. It's insane. Perhaps if they maybe kept teasing it in a similar way to how they were doing the weapons, they showed off the spirit gun in a poster, maybe that would have made a difference, but I don't know. It was just kind of dead in the water as soon as these posters came out. They just ruined all momentum at the time for this series. Until the trailer came out. I literally made an entire video that was inspired by this trailer because that trailer, it just looked so good. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of expectations going into this, and then I watched that trailer and I'm like, holy crap, this series looks genuinely phenomenal. And I'm happy to say that that energy just carried on onto the show. This show had arguably one of the greatest first episodes out of any series I've ever watched in my life, period. I'm not even just referring to live action anime adaptations. I'm talking about just shows in general. Every show I've ever watched, barely any of them can hold a candle to this first episode. I think it's just a master class in how to adapt the manga, seriously. Takumi Kitamura is no stranger to the realm of acting. I'm honestly still kind of shocked that not only is there a Tokyo Revengers live action film, but that there's 3 of them, and he plays the main character Takemichi in all of them. Nonetheless, I ended up thinking that this dude was a perfect Yusuke from the first episode alone. What really sold me on him was that one scene in which he reacted to the teacher, he kind of just gave him the shoulder after he was trying to protect that kid. For some reason, that was the moment that I was just yeah, that's Yusuke. That's him. It's him right there. It's him in live action, and I love it. I'm loving this. That's what sold me on him as an actor, but what sold me for the show was how brutal that death scene was when Yusuke got hit by the truck. That was just a moment that I gasped. I could not believe how brutal they showed that. I just knew that they were going all in on this production for that. I don't know why. That was just it for me. I'd even go as far to say that this live action, the way that they approached that scene in particular, was better than the manga and anime and how they did it. That was just how to do it. That was how you do it. Mixing in elements of the Beast of Maze Castle with those parasites in this first episode was superb as well. And the action scene that ends this episode on top of how emotional the wake scene is, I am telling you, This episode is an 11 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10, 11. I think it's that good. The second episode carried the same energy as it adapted most of the Artifacts of Darkness arc with the proper introductions of Goki and Kurama. Hiei didn't really have much to do in these first 2 episodes, which makes it harder to believe why he's joining the main cast of characters later on in the show. By that action scene between Goki and Yusuke, holy sh. This is one of the best action scenes I've seen in a long time. Props to Kitamura for being able to convincingly portray a fight against an imaginary demon. Yusuke did exactly what any professional would do in terms of how he moved and fought in this exact scenario. God, it was perfect. I swear to you, how did they just do this? In the Kurama segment with the mirror was a fantastic adaptation. I didn't originally like him as the casting for Kurama at first, but after seeing him here, I'm fine with him. He actually did a great job, and I'm shocked at how great his costuming and hairstyling was. Changing the story behind the shadow sword from the weapon that turns others into demons, and instead into unlocking Hiei's third eye, might be a controversial change, but I personally love it, as the live action managed to seamlessly interweave this element into a bit of the Rescue Yukina arc into the series. Now, one of my biggest worries about the live action was how exactly they're going to adapt the entirety of the Spirit Detective saga. The issue with this saga in both the anime and the manga was the lack of a narrative through line. It came through as just the misadventures of Yusuke as he would go on a mission sent forth by Koenma and get caught up in some insane scenarios, but nothing was really building up to anything until the very end of the Rescue Yukina arc when Toguro was introduced. I was extremely worried about this element, and I actually had a similar worry for the live-action One Piece adaptation, as the East Blue Saga actually had a similar issue as well. Their solution though was turning Arlong into a season-long villain, which worked perfectly in my opinion. Turning Hiei's initial motivations, which in my opinion were quite shallow, and did a very bad job properly introducing the character, into the turning point in the narrative was extremely smart to me. Sarukane was also lifted from being this extremely minor villain into a much bigger role here for good reason, and focusing more on this Rescue Yukina arc was the smartest decision possible to make this one giant story. Nonetheless, episode 2 gets a 10 out of 10 for me. Things do start to fall through for me starting episode 3, however. Genkai's training and Genkai as a whole just went by way too fast. Genkai is arguably the 5th main character of YuYu Hakusho and has a major presence throughout the entirety of it. I'm not crazy about the actress who plays her, nor was I really convinced that she was all that great of this spirit user. And with how fast she just gives Yusuke the spirit wave orb, it's just wild to me. I know the way the narrative set this up with how Toguro was able to detect their presence made this segment made sense, but I still just think that the pacing here was lacking. The one extremely huge positive for me from episode 3 was Kuwabara's presence. I loved how the episode just made his character very clear. Not just the character Kuwabara, I mean like his personality, just who he is as a human, as a person. Just really focusing on his hard work, on his determination, and how that makes him a strong fighter. And how he was able to unlock the spirit sword as a result of that hard work, that determination. I mean, and then Yusuke watching on, I love that. Yusuke just seeing him and being inspired by Kuwabara, and that's the reason why he went back to his own training. Chef's kiss, so good. And ending the episode with a fake Hiei kidnapping Keiko, and the group finally get together to go to the Dark Tournament. I'm not gonna lie, I really like it. This episode, probably the weakest one, but it's a 7 out of 10. And of course, this is the big controversy with this live action adaptation. Adapting the Dark Tournament into this series, well, it wouldn't have been an issue if it was given an entire season, but wow. Fitting the Dark Tournament, this behemoth of a saga, into 2 episodes is quite the decision. I still don't really know how to feel about it, because on one hand, that's just absurd. Imagine combining the Saiyan Saga and Frieza Saga into just 5 episodes of a live action, or the Hunter Exam and York New City. These are just 2 behemoths of story arcs, and so much of the stuff into just 1 season of a show. I'll give kudos where kudos is due, even in spite of this challenge of the live action. When taking only the live action into consideration, no anime, no manga, just only the live action, they did a decent enough job adapting this. I speak this only from the perspective of those who I watched this with. I watched this series with my wife and a bunch of friends who I've never watched, never heard of, never read YuYu Hakusho before. So going into this series, they were going in blind, like super duper ultra mega blind. Yet the dramatic shift of the story into the Dark Tournament didn't bother them because it made sense in the context of the story. So it's odd, it's a negative, but it's also a positive for me how they were able to work it. I'll just say that at the end of the day, it isn't enough to detract me from the story, from the live action as a whole. That's what I'll say. The main highlights of the 4th episode are the individual fights between Team Urameshi and Team Toguro, especially Kurama vs. Karasu and Hiei vs. Bui. This truly was just a fighting episode, and the fighting itself, I can't lie, it was spectacular. Kurama's transformation into Yoko was perhaps maybe the weakest element to me. The costume design didn't do it for me and didn't sell me on how overpowered he was, but besides that, holy shit. I mean, even the use of the Dragon of the Darkness flame had me hyped. Although I wish there was some backstory to it, as Hiei just uses it out of nowhere without context. Hiei as a whole is arguably the weakest element of this series for me. He's just not fleshed out enough whatsoever and kind of just feels like an extra when it comes to the dynamic of the rest of the group, but I'll save that for later. Episode 4, 8 out of 10. The 5th episode is largely, of course, Yusuke and the group versus younger Toguro. This fight was dope and I love seeing Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei's involvement in the fight. Yusuke consistently trying to stab Toguro with that one piece sticking out of the wall had me cringing, but I love that it managed to showcase how creative and ruthless Yusuke gets in a fight. I think Toguro at 100% looked a little off, but still got the job done, and through, the episode was largely fine with no real issues for me, aside from the Hiei segment with Yukina at the end, and that weird Genkai and Toguro in the Afterlife segment. I know that was adapted from the manga, but it just didn't sit right with me. This series could have definitely benefited from an extra episode. This series desperately needed an episode dedicated to Yusuke's training under Genkai. An episode where she doesn't die at the end of the same episode that she's introduced in, just so she can have some extra weight in the series. This moment should have been Yusuke's turning point as a character. In that same episode, it could have been the backstory for Hiei and his sister. Hiei not telling his sister who he is at the end of the last episode makes sense to us anime and manga fans, but no sense to anyone just watching the live action. I know this backstory didn't really get explained until closer to the end of the series, but for the purposes of this live action, Hiei desperately needed some extra story to him that Kurama managed to get, but he never did. Besides the Yoko design, these are truly the 2 biggest hiccups of the series for me, and it could have really taken this to the next level. This could have been better than the One Piece live action series, but because of that, I don't think so. I know One Piece live action had its own pacing problems, but I don't think it was as bad as this. I gave the final episode a 7 out of 10. So when I average all those scores together, it's an 8.5 out of 10. This show is awesome. I love and adore this series, but I can't deny that it's definitely front heavy. Those first 2 episodes are absolute perfection in the art of adapting a manga into live action. I just can't believe it. Without those 2 first episodes, the series would likely just be a regular meh anime live action adaptation, but instead it elevated this series to contend with One Piece as one of the greatest anime adaptations of all time. I'm truly curious how a second season could look like, which I'll definitely talk about in a future video. Until then though, please give me your thoughts on this live action adaptation. Did you love YuYu Hakusho? Did you hate YuYu Hakusho? What are your thoughts on the Dark Tournament being adapted here? Still kinda crazy, but I rolled with it. My name is Josue, and until next time, I'll catch y'all later.